Introducing our next speaker is someone who has donated her kidney.
But before her donation, Tracy Hulick ran marathons and ultra marathons.
Many of us won't be surprised, but Tracy has continued her running ways.
And she also founded a successful organization, Kidney Donor Athletes, a group of kidney donors from around the country who share a passion for athletics, and many of whom are triathletes or ultra marathoners.
Thank you everyone for attending our very first volunteer Living Donor Advocate Conference. My name is Tracy Hulick. I am a living kidney donor. I'm also a member of the Donor to Donor team, and I am the founder and president of Kidney Donor Athletes. And today I am so honored and excited that I get to introduce Dr. Joshua Mezrich to all of you. He is a very well-respected transplant surgeon at the University of Wisconsin Transplant Center. And his journey began as a graduate of Cornell Medical College. He then went on to do his residency at the University of Chicago, and then he went to Massachusetts General Hospital for his research. Then he went to University of Wisconsin Hospital for his fellowship. And then he stayed. And that part of his story is special to me because I'm from Madison, and that's also where I donated my kidney. In May of 2017, I donated my kidney to a stranger, and that kicked off a national donor chain in which 4 people received kidneys. The most common thing that people ask me when they hear that is, what inspired you to do that? And for me, that happened in 7th grade. It was the very first day of school, and a classmate was telling us about how that summer a family member of hers donated his kidney to her cousin and that they were all doing fine. And I heard that, and I'll never forget what that felt like to me. It just felt like, of course I'm going to do that someday. What a no-brainer decision that was. And as now we all know, that's what happened. And it's amazing to me how something so small, one small conversation on one day as a 12-year-old would shape part of my adulthood. Now, Dr. Mezrich, he's not just a transplant surgeon, but he's also a father and husband. And somehow, during this very full life of his, he also wrote a book, When Death Becomes Life. And getting ready for this introduction, I read this book, and I love how it gives you a sense of how transplant got to where it is. You get to understand some of the history and the pioneers in the field. But more importantly to me, you get to know what it's like to be a transplant surgeon. You get to be in his shoes and understand some of those decisions and feel the highs and feel the devastating lows of that profession. And I was reading this book and I couldn't help but wonder, okay, who else is being impacted by this book? Who else is reading this? So I went to a very reputable source, Instagram, and I searched the hashtag When Death Becomes Life. And I was scrolling through and I was looking at different people's posts and captions, and I stopped when I saw a post that was nothing like any of the other ones I had seen. It was a photo of a little girl standing in her front yard on her first day of 1st grade, and her name was Eloise. And Eloise was holding a big sign, much like we've seen for so many other kids going back to school. It asked things like, what's your favorite color, your favorite book, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when Eloise answered the question of what's your favorite book, she said, When Death Becomes Life by Dr. Joshua Mezrich. And when she was asked what she wants to be when she grows up, you probably guessed it, she wants to be a transplant surgeon. And my heart was so full. I thought, well, this is amazing. This little 6-year-old girl wants to be a transplant surgeon. And then my skeptical brain started to kick in. I thought, well, maybe she's his daughter or a neighbor or his niece. And so I had to know what the connection was to Dr. Mezrich. So I sent a message, and the mother responded pretty quickly. And they don't know the family. They don't know Dr. Mezrich. They've never met. How this happened is Eloise was listening to NPR one day, which is amazing in itself, and the radio host was talking about Dr. Mezrich and his book. And Eloise was so fascinated and so inspired that she asked her mom to buy her the book. So her mother bought her the audiobook, because she's 6. And since then, Eloise has listened to this audiobook start to finish a minimum of 7 times. And this amazing story doesn't stop there. The cherry on the top of this amazing story about this little girl is that she wanted more than that. She wanted to talk to Dr. Mezrich. So she sent him an email. And he wrote her back. And they have corresponded. And her little heart is so lit up by this. And the point I'm trying to make here is that I am living proof, and Eloise is living proof, that taking this time to share with kids about transplant can change the shape of their lives. And Dr. Mezrich is incredible for so many reasons. He doesn't just save lives, he also inspires those people that are going to shape the future of transplant medicine. So thank you, Dr. Mezrich. Thank you everyone for attending. And everyone, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Joshua Mezrich.
Hey guys, thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. Although to be honest, I don't know what you said. Hopefully you mentioned my Pulitzer Prize. I do want to start by addressing the elephant in the room. You can look at my hair right now, and it is true, I am a twin brother of Brad Pitt. I know he didn't want me to say that on video, but I have to say it. No, I'm kidding, of course. I think the hair looks good. It's sort of COVID related, and now I've gotten obsessed with it. But some of my partners think I look less like Brad Pitt and more like Larry from the Three Stooges. Nevertheless, it's great to be here with you guys in spirit. I love being back in New York City. I was really looking forward to being back there. As some of you may know, I grew up in New Jersey, in the town of Princeton, and then I went to medical school in New York City at Cornell and lived there for 4 years. I still have a lot of family there and love coming back. So I miss you guys out there, and I wish I could be there. It's really great to be able to talk to this organization. As I think many of you know, if you've read my book, I have so much love and respect for donors, both living and deceased. I see donors as heroes, the kind of people that run into a burning building to save someone. I know it's actually safer than that, but nevertheless, it's this same leap of faith that people take to do something wonderful, to help someone or maybe to help multiple people. And I think that's very, very special. And I do a lot of different things in my job, but absolutely my favorite thing in the job is to work with donors, living and deceased, and to be a part of that gift. I think in a way I'm the smallest part of it. We kind of are the people who wrap the gift, if you will. But I'm really proud to be a part of that. And I think at the end of my career, it'll remain the thing I'm most proud of. I feel the same way about deceased donors as living donors. I see the deceased donors as my patients as well. And when I am involved in procuring organs from them, I take that gift so seriously. I love learning about who those donors are. I know how important this legacy is. And I don't like to look at trying to get every potential deceased donor to get more recipients transplanted. I like to look at it as trying to help those people give these beautiful gifts and give this legacy. That's kind of where I look at it. Obviously, it's great to get our patients transplanted as well. So my thanks goes out to all of you guys. And I've had a number of living donors who've said, oh, we're not heroes, and maybe some of you don't like to be called that. You know, just accept it. The truth is, in this world we live in, we need great acts of kindness. We need positives. We need to remember that we're all in this life together. We're all the same on the inside. We can all help each other out. And one of my favorite things is when I do a donor operation and the patient gets through the recovery and they tell me this is the greatest thing I've ever done. And that's my hope, that all donors feel that way. And so it's very special to be here talking to you guys. So I guess I'm here to talk to you guys about my life in transplant, and of course a little bit about my book. I think this is a version of the book, maybe coming out reversed, but When Death Becomes Life, Notes from a Transplant Surgeon. Still available on Amazon. I'm just kidding. If I had come to New York, I would have given you all free copies. So hopefully Ned is able to arrange buying copies for all you guys. I'm just kidding. I know humor is difficult in this setting, but nevertheless, I'd like to start by talking about why I wrote the book. Well, a number of reasons. I've always been fascinated by medical history, learning about how the pioneers were able to make a field like this happen. I knew that transplant was really a new field. It's not one of those things that's been around forever, and not very long ago, people thought it was a field that was complete science fiction, and they kind of laughed at the people that took part in it. And I knew that some of the pioneers who were involved in starting this field were still alive, and I definitely wanted to tell their story. So I knew it would be part history. I also wanted to write part memoir. I'm a kind of cerebral, honest guy. I guess you could say I'm in touch with my feelings, and I like to really talk honestly about what it's like to be in this field, to be a surgeon, to have all the victories that we have, but also to have the failures, to make mistakes, to try and deal with that, to deal with what it's like when you make an error, or maybe even you do everything right and a patient has a complication. I wanted to really talk to people about that and say honestly, what is it like to be in this world? What is it like to make these decisions? What is it like to be able to celebrate the victories but suffer through the agony of complications? And I wanted to tell my patients' stories. I really wanted to share some of these amazing stories about this gift of life. I think transplant is a really different field than other areas of medicine. Other areas of medicine, we try and cure diseases, maybe we fight off death, maybe we try to give people good deaths, which is certainly important. But transplant's different. Transplant's this field where we often take from death. We start with death or potentially start with the gift from a living donor. And that makes it a totally different field than any other area of medicine. So those were kind of the three things I wanted to talk about: the history of the field, my own coming of age as a surgeon, and my patients' stories. I struggled for a while about how I would write the book. I should mention, I knew I would always write a book, or hopefully more than one book. If any editors are out there in the audience, let me know if you want to buy my next book. But my brother is a writer. Ben Mezrich, he wrote a bunch of big bestsellers, including the book behind the movie The Social Network and the book behind the movie 21 about the MIT gamblers. And I've always loved reading. My parents used to make us read 2 books a week growing up, and we would sit at the dinner table and talk about them, and it made us all love reading. We still talk about all the books that we read. And I knew I would write something, but I hadn't figured out how I would do it. And then in about 2011, I was reading the book Emperor of All Maladies, which is a beautiful book by Mukherjee, a physician himself at Columbia in New York. He's in the field of oncology or cancer. And he had just finished his training in Boston, and he wrote a book about the history of cancer, or at least certain blood cancers. And he used his patients to tell the story. So he would tell the story of a patient that he was dealing with, what their life was like with this disease, and then he would jump back in time and talk about the history of how they got to where we are now. And that was sort of an epiphany for me when I read that book. I thought it was a beautiful book. It did win a Pulitzer Prize, which it clearly deserved. And I thought, I want to do something like that with transplant. But again, the big difference maybe in our field is that a lot of those pioneers were still alive. And so I knew that there was some urgency to jump into this book and to write it while I could still talk to some of these people. People like Tom Starzl, the father of liver transplant, and Roy Calm, another father of transplant in England who's still alive, and some others. And that was really a wonderful thing to do. I will say one piece of advice, if any of you are out there thinking of writing a book. I think the biggest piece of advice I could give you is that if you can get a brother, sister, mother, father who's a best-selling writer, that's a huge advantage, so I might work on that first. But my brother Ben helped me a ton in terms of getting into the field, getting an agent. And he gave me a few pieces of really great advice, and maybe I'll share 2 of them with you. The first thing he said was, when you go to write your first draft, just write. Don't worry if it's any good, don't worry if it's too long, just write. Because he said the number one reason that people don't finish their book is they try to make it perfect and they never get out of the first chapter. So he was like, don't worry about any of that. The first draft can be terrible, it doesn't even matter, just write. And the second thing he said is, when you finish writing at the end of a session, Never stop at the end of a chapter or the end of a story. Stop in the middle of a story, maybe even in the middle of a sentence, because he said when you go back to start writing again, it's always so hard to get started. You surf the web, you watch TV, your kids are running around. But if you're in the middle of a story, you can jump back right into it, pick it back up where you left off, and by the time you get done with the story, your creative juices are flowing, you're able to keep moving. And I found both of those pieces of advice incredible. To be honest, I never had writer's block. I wrote like an animal, and my first draft was really long. It was so incredibly long that I called Ben and said, Ben, how long is a book? And Ben was like, well, we do books in terms of words. You know, the average book is 60 to 100,000 words. How long is yours? And I didn't want to tell him, but it was 300,000 words, which actually is longer than the Bible. But I figured that book did well, so maybe mine would do similarly. So I actually spent a whole year cutting it down to size, and believe it or not, I enjoyed that as well. Let me move on to talk about the book a little bit. I always knew I would start and end the book on an airplane, because I do think one thing about transplant, it really is one of these fields that's maybe very adventurous. It's a field about pushing the limits. Again, I mentioned it's a pretty new field, but you have to remember in the 1940s, even 1950s, the field was really looked at like science fiction, like there was no way it could ever work. And then in the 60s into 70s, there were some successes, but more bad outcomes than good. It wasn't really into the 1980s that the field became reliable with the approval of cyclosporin in 1983. And you know, the mindset of the people that were involved in the field, both the physicians, but also the patients, was that they were going to take this leap of faith. They were going to do everything they could to make this field a reality. They had that sort of adventurous spirit, this belief that it was always going to work out. I mean, one of the things I wanted to address in talking to some of these pioneers was how did you persist when you had so many bad outcomes? And I got a chance to talk to Tom Starzl and others about that. And the truth is, it never occurred to them that it wasn't going to work out. They knew it would work out. They had a few successes that convinced them of that, and they also had the personalities that they were going to persevere. It just was going to work out. And I think, you know, maybe the donors feel that way too. They feel like this may be a leap of faith, but this is, you know, really going to work out, the living donors. And I think the patients felt that way as well. So I want to read a little bit from the book because the words are just so good. I mean, I did write it, so. Anyways, here's how the book starts. In a small plane over the hills of La Crosse, Wisconsin, September 2 a.m. While I'd been on planes many times, I'd never experienced the full power of a thunderstorm at 10,000 feet. The small King Air, a 6-passenger dual prop, was bouncing around uncontrollably. Every few seconds it would go into free fall and then hurl itself back up violently. The two pilots in the cockpit were hitting knobs and dials, trying to silence the various alarms that sounded as we rocked violently back and forth. It didn't help that our physician's assistant, Mike, who had been on hundreds of flights in small planes before, was screaming uncontrollably, "We're gonna die! We're gonna die!" There was a bad word in there too, but my editor made me take it out. Given that Mike was such a seasoned member of our team, I could only assume that this particular flight was going badly. Skipping ahead a little bit. It was the 3rd month of my transplant fellowship at the University of Wisconsin. I hadn't chosen transplant surgery so I could fly through thunderstorms in the middle of the night over the fields of central Wisconsin. Hell, I'd grown up in New Jersey, spent most of my life in the Northeast, and had never known anything about the Midwest. I had been drawn to Madison because it is one of the best places to be a transplant fellow. I think that's still true today. It really is a special place. I remember that night because we were going on a procurement to get organs from a donor. And we flew out to this hospital up north. I think it might have been in Green Bay or what did I see? Somewhere like that. And we got to the hospital and the team said, okay, let's go talk to the donor family. And I was honestly horrified. I thought, they're going to hate me. They're going to look at us as this group of vultures that came to take their loved ones' organs. And I thought it was going to be a terrible experience. I couldn't have been more wrong. There were a bunch of people in the room, probably about 15 people, and they were all crying. But when we walked in, the room lit up. The whole family was dying to talk to us. They wanted to hear about the procurement, how it would work, who would get the organs, when we would do the transplants, could they meet the recipients. Then they wanted to tell us about their loved one, this young man who had died too early. They wanted to tell us what he cared about, who it was that cared about him, the things he liked to do. When it became time for us to go and bring him to the operating room, every one of them hugged us and wished us well. Then when we got in the operating room, we always perform a moment of silence when we're ready to move on. And then our coordinator will usually read something about the donor. It's usually something the family has given us. It may be a poem or a prayer. It may be a story about the donor or something about a place they like to go. And it allows us to remember that this is a real person and that their legacy is going on to other people. Then once that's done, we kind of take a deep breath and move on to the task at hand, to the surgery. And it's kind of this interesting mix of emotions where you go from the emotions of knowing that someone had just died to the reality of solving this puzzle of surgery. I think about surgery as solving a puzzle. You start the operation, you have a vision in your mind of what the anatomy is going to look like, and then every patient's different and you have to solve the puzzle. And your mind very quickly shifts into the task at hand. It's actually, in my opinion, easy to push those emotions aside, whether it be a donor operation or a recipient. You don't sit there thinking, oh my gosh, this is some person, I don't want to hurt them. You really focus on the task at hand, how you can do it smoothly. Is it matching up with your mental picture of what it was going to be like? Then once we finish the case, we pack up and we come back to the University of Wisconsin. And it's always this interesting mix of emotions because the recipients will usually have a large group with them as well. They've been waiting on the list, so this is a moment of exhilaration and happiness, but they know that someone just died, at least in the setting of a deceased donation. I want to read another quote because, again, it's so good. But this is why I love the field of transplant. Since I began taking care of sick people, I have noticed that one of the hardest things about getting sick, really sick, is that you are separated from the people you love. Even when families are dedicated to the patient, illness separates the well from the sick. The sick suffer alone. They undergo procedures and surgeries alone, and in the end, they die alone. Transplant is different. Transplant is all about having someone else join you in your illness. It may be in the form of an organ from a recently deceased donor, a selfless gift given by someone who has never met you, or a kidney or liver from a relative, friend, or acquaintance. In every case, someone is saying, in effect, let me join you in your recovery, your suffering, your fear of the unknown, your desire to become healthy, to get your life back. Let me bear some of your risk with you. That quote, really speaks to me. I mean, obviously, part of it is because I wrote it, but I do think that illness really separates the sick from the well. Like, of course, family can be there with them, but in the end, it's the sick patient who is suffering, is in pain, has to go down for tests that hurt, can't eat, and is worried that they're going to die. And when they do die, it's sad for everyone, but maybe the saddest thing is that they miss out on seeing the lives of their loved ones with the different milestones that are going to come in the future. And that's what I think is the beauty of transplant, that especially in the case of a living donor is able to say, you know what, you're ill, let me join you in this, let me bear some of the unknown, some of the pain, some of the worry, and be sick with you, and together we'll get better. There's something like real to me in that. I think it's incredibly special. And so like when donors tell me, oh, it's not heroic, well, it's heroic in that way. It's allowing yourself to step forward and be a part of this illness so that you can help someone get better. And I don't know what's better than that. As I mentioned, I do love taking care of living donors. It's really one of my favorite things about my job. And I've also feel like mentioning we've been so fortunate to be a part of the NKR, the National Kidney Registry, and that's been like a real quantum leap on order of all the major breakthroughs that we've had in transplant. People have been talking about paired exchange forever, but I think the NKR with all the programs involved really got this to work out. And it's been such an incredible experience to be a part of, to be able to help all these people to donate and to give this gift and not worry so much about compatibility. It's been really special. I think especially when you think about the chains, I mean, every donation is great, but the thought that people can donate a kidney and have it affect so many people, I think has been really special to me to be a part of, and a really exciting thing to be a part of. I want to read a section about living donation because, well, that's what we're here about, but it's one of my favorite parts of the book. One thing I'll mention, when I talk to living donors, I try to talk to them about the operation and really what it is they're getting into. And I try to talk to them about the risk. The risks by numbers are actually very, very low that something is going to go wrong. But I don't think the numbers really capture much about what we're thinking about. I mean, yes, the risk of dying during a donation is 3 in 10,000. It's really, really unlikely. The risk of kidney failure is just less than 1% over their lifetime, which I think is a really low number. But when patients hear those numbers, I don't know that they have the same feeling about it that I do. If I tell a patient, maybe not a donor, but in a different scenario, you have a 1-2% chance of dying on the table, that patient will often say to me, that's great, that's nothing, that's not going to happen to me. Whereas to me, that's like a huge number. There are very few operations we do that have that type of risk. Sometimes I'll tell, donors, we expect things to go well, but this is surgery, things could go wrong. And they'll say, Doc, I could go outside and get hit by a car on the street. I could get killed tomorrow. And I like to say, maybe you should think of it as the operation is the accident, is the car accident. That's already happening, and let's see what's going to happen after. I don't want to scare people away from doing it because I do think it's very safe. But I try to avoid giving numbers because I don't know that patients hear the same thing I'm saying. Let me just read this section. Here's an example of why the numbers don't always affect a donor's decision. A potential donor came to see me wanting to donate a kidney to his wife, the love of his life, the mother of his children. He had been turned down by a major program due to medical reasons. He didn't have any absolute contraindications. He was not diabetic, didn't have heart disease, didn't have any cancers. But he was obese, his blood pressure was high, and he had a history of smoking. Each one of those things could have increased his risk of having a problem with his remaining kidneys someday. When I first saw this man, I had my doubts too. But he told me, I know you guys think I'm a little more high risk than your average donor. I get that. But you've got to help me. This is something I really want to do. My wife is my whole life. Our family doesn't work without her. She has done so much for me. If you let me do this, I will thank you forever. I'll sign any form you want. I promise I won't sue you. If down the road something happens to my other kidney and I go on dialysis, it will be worth it for me. I have no hesitation. I guess it was smart that he said the line, he won't sue us. That was a good line. I go on to say, what do you say to that? This man seemed to have grasped the data, understood the risks I'd outlined for him. Wasn't it his body? How paternalistic was I supposed to be? Of course it was possible for someone to make a bad, even an unreasonable decision for himself to protect someone he loved. Was there a risk that was so high that we would have to say no? We wouldn't let mothers and fathers donate their hearts to their children, even though many patients would be willing to do this. In the end, I let the guy donate, but not before giving him my standard line. It's not necessarily data-based, but I believe it. If you donate and stop smoking, you may actually be healthier than if you don't donate and keep smoking. Of course, the worst scenario was the most likely one, that he'd donate and keep smoking. Anyways, the surgery went well because I'm really good at it. No, I'm just kidding. He had a bit of a rough recovery, but ultimately did fine. Nothing major happened, and he got completely better. I saw him back in my office about a month later, and I asked him, what he thought about it. Doc, this is the best thing I have ever done in my life. Sure, I had a few bad days, but I have my wife back. I will never be able to thank you enough for what you did for my family. He gave me a big, warm handshake. His thick, ruddy hand enveloped mine. It was the hand of someone who had done physical labor all of his life, a hand that would provide for his family no matter how much it took from him. He got one thing wrong. I'm not the one who did something for his family. I love that image of the big ruddy hand enveloping mine. I think that, to me, describes a lot of what our donors are like, being in Wisconsin, people who work hard for a living, take care of their family, maybe their farm or whatever. And it turns out I don't have big ruddy hands. In fact, quite the opposite. We went to a dude ranch a few years back, and I was shaking the wranglers' hands, and they were like, "Your hands, they're so soft." And they brought over all the wranglers, including the female wranglers, and they were all like rubbing my hands. And I guess I'm not a guy who's done good, honest work for all my life, so I do like that image. I do want to end this talk by reading the end of the book. I hope I haven't read too much, and now you will want to go read it yourself. But I like what the ending captures about my thoughts about the field of transplantation. And again, I had mentioned I always knew I would start and end the book on a plane. As the plane levels out at 20,000 feet, I look over at Felix, our German-trained procurement surgeon, stretched out comfortably in his seat, headphones on, fast asleep. Wide awake myself, I look out at the night sky now lit up by the moon. For a second I wonder what I'm doing here, flying in this little plane over the farmlands of Oshkosh, separated from my family. My two little girls, now sleeping peacefully at home, will wake up in the morning and discover me gone, an experience they're quite familiar with. I shift my gaze back to Felix, along his extended legs and down to the cooler he is so unceremoniously using as a footrest. Inside sit a liver, 2 kidneys, and a pancreas. Somewhere else in this same night sky, under this same moon, 2 other planes are flying in different directions from ours. Each one has a cooler. One contains a heart, the other 2 lungs. Just 2 days ago, these organs were working in concert, allowing a 42-year-old father to eat, drink, go to work, hold his kids. These organs helped him climb up on his roof to clean out the gutters, but they couldn't stop him from falling off. Now they sit in ice until they will be filled with blood and returned to the living, ready to sustain a new body, allowing 5 other people to live, love, be happy, be sad, enjoy their families. These 5 people don't know one another, don't even live in the same city, but they will forever be joined by the web of transplantation. They will be saved by some guy who will never get to see his gift of life, but maybe down the road his wife and children will. And maybe they'll think, yes, he was some guy. I know that's what I think. I lean back and close my eyes, but I can't sleep. Thank you guys so much. I wish I could be with you in person, but it's truly an honor to get to talk to this group. Thanks again.
And I also want to mention that sponsored organizations are playing a critical role in the success of this Volunteer Living Donor Advocacy Conference. And in that context, I'd like to highlight the valuable guidance and support we have received from CareDx, your partner in transplant care, as well as from Veloxis, Nora, Equinox, Vineyard Vines, VRL Eurofins, Brooks & Filatico, Oomph, Maritime Partners, and Sanofi Genzyme.